Have you ever gone for a walk outside and thought to yourself, someone should make a game about this? Well, too late. English developers Frontier, probably best known for This, These and Oh Dear God Why. Back in 2008 they showed off their cutesy puzzle platformer LostWinds, one of the premier titles for Nintendo's WiiWare service. At this point in the Wii's life, Virtual Console was already very well established. It allowed you to purchase retro titles from a variety of older platforms, including NES, SNES, N64 and more, and funnily enough, at the time had more games available than Nintendo Switch Online offers now. The system had been out for nearly a year and a half, so if you were looking for something a bit more modern, there was plenty of big releases too, but being mostly AAA titles, they came at the price tag to match.
But what if you wanted to try bold new experiences at the forefront of the medium without the premium price tag? What if you don't want to play the same games your grandparents did when they were growing up? What if I want to play the digital version of Tetris Party on an SD card instead of whatever the hell this thing is? What the f*** is a TurboGrafx 16? That's where WiiWare comes in. Smaller developers creating cheaper, bite-sized, downloadable titles with no limits to their creativity. Except file size, we're going to need to keep it under 40 megabytes.
Yeah, a 40 megabyte limit on the games. No wonder these guys ship their next two consoles with either 8 or 32 gigs of storage.
LostWinds is one of the better known titles for this service. At release it was met with very positive reviews across the board and even managed to win the prestigious IGN Best Use of Wii Remote Award for that year. And for only 1,000 Wii points, it's a steal.
So get your points cards at the ready and let's take a trip to the Wii Shop Channel. Oh crap, better blur that. Okay, plan B. Luckily the game is available on iOS too, never mind. Alrighty, time to visit my favourite backlog dumping ground, Steam. Just gotta avoid eye contact with all these games I told myself I'd play. And here we are. LostWinds follows Toku, this cute little guy who runs like he's perpetually about to fall over as he teams up with the wind spirit Enril. Gameplay wise, it's a fairly basic platformer with a twist. Enril's wind powers help solve puzzles to get Toku from A to B. These abilities are fairly basic at first, but more are unlocked as you progress to let you solve more puzzles and pass more obstacles to get you to areas you previously weren't able to, so I guess you could call it a Metroidvania, but maybe not in front of anybody. The lore of Mistralis and the story are set up straight away through a cutscene that if you told me it's from a new Zelda game, I'd probably believe you. Basically, an evil spirit named Balasar wanted to be a god, which didn't go down too well with all the other spirits. They had a big fight and Enril trapped him inside a stone, but got stuck in there with it too, leaving them lost for centuries. Of course, the evil spirit eventually breaks out, leaving the good spirit trapped inside the stone fragment, who must then team up with the first young child they come across to save the day. Moving Toku around feels alright, but movement is very limited. He can move left, right, pick stuff up, and that's it. He can't jump, so you have to use gusts of wind to get him anywhere. You even need it for basic actions like pulling levers or opening chests. Combat as well is done entirely through Enril. In the first game, enemies are pretty pathetic. A stiff breeze towards a wall or floor is enough to kill most things, with others requiring an extra gust or two, but it's fairly effortless. They're not the most inspired either, just different flavour of purple blobs, and there's only really one that might give you a bit of bother. The main issue is that using wind powers for everything lets you keep enemies at a safe distance, so you'll rarely take a hit. Top that off with a generous supply of hearts that regenerate over time and plenty of fruit dotted around that restores health, and you're in for a fairly easy time overall. The abilities on offer in the first game are quite basic, and so puzzles are definitely on the easy side of things too. Most things involve using a slipstream to move a heavy rock, watering a plant seed that you need to move in order to get up somewhere high, or burning some vines using a nearby torch. In fairness, they get more enjoyable towards the end of the game when they combine more of these mechanics, but it can be inconsistent with its own logic at times too, like sometimes I need to water these plants, other times I don't. In one area, for some reason I couldn't use a rock enemy to break a barricade, but I was able to use a piece of fruit. There wasn't really anything that had me truly stumped. They're all relatively straightforward, but not in a bad way. The puzzles lend themselves quite well to the platforming. They let you experiment with the different abilities a bit more, and all the elements kind of come together in a nice, cohesive way where you can just go through an area with a nice feeling of flow that suits the whole wind spirit companion thing the game has going on. LostWinds has an assortment of NPC characters in the background that you might talk to once and maybe try to knock over, but aside from two, there isn't really anyone else who does anything. It's a bit of a shame they don't have more personality because the character designs are really charming. There's Notia, who gives you the world map and is pretty darn funny. and Dio, the wise old man who drives the plot forward by tasking you to find 4 memory chests located in the world in order to get his memories back, because he's a spirit too, I guess? These memory chests give a little bit of backstory, but rather than playable flashbacks or even cutscenes, this guy just explains it to you in a text box, which is pretty disappointing considering I really quite like the cutscene's art style. I thought you might see some of the other spirits that are mentioned, or even the bad guy who's supposedly the big threat to the world, but no. The best you get is a handful of enemy types that are ridiculously easy to swat out of the way, and probably the most underwhelming final boss I've seen before the game slaps you with a to be continued screen. And continue it did, when LostWinds Winter of the Melodias launched a year later in October 2009. Right from the get-go, LostWinds 2 feels much grander in scale. There's a whole extra playable character this time round. You might only play as them for the first 2 minutes of the game, but still, it counts. Here you get to see the Melodias civilization mentioned in the first game, which sets the scene before you see any familiar characters, so it's nice they expanded the world a bit more in the sequel. We then see some familiar faces as Notia 3310 comes in with the news that Toku's mum has gone missing and is in danger, so Toku sets out to follow the scattered pages from her journal in order to find her. I have to say the setup is a bit more compelling this time round compared to a rock being like, "Psst, hey kid, want to save the world?" It throws you back in fairly seamlessly and quite literally.
Trust me.
It doesn't do the trope of stripping away your abilities from previous games, making you collect them all again, which is nice, so Winter of the Melodias builds on the foundations from the first game really well. It adds a few more wind abilities to your arsenal that add to the puzzle variety. There's a vortex updraft for getting to high up places that later also functions as a drill and lets you drain bodies of water by turning them into clouds that you can move around. These are pretty great power-ups. My only gripe is that they're introduced quite late in the game, so you don't get to use them quite as much as I would have liked, which is a bit of a bummer. Something you might notice towards the beginning, or even in the title of the game, is that this new mountainous area is a little colder than usual, which you'll quickly discover isn't normal for the village of Summerfalls, as winter one day arrived, but never left. So, for the first 20 minutes or so, you have to worry about freezing, and can't stray too far from nearby torches for very long unless seeing a child freeze to death was on your WiiWare bingo card. But once you get some warmer clothes, Toku is able to get around much easier. This is also about the point where you're ambushed by a mysterious floating guy and carried to safety by a mountain tribe to their secret village where Toku's mother is staying. She was attacked by the same floating purple guy and left cursed, so it's up to Toku and Enril to undo it. The pair go to seek out Sante. She's a spirit who can control the seasons and is the one responsible for the untimely winter, but more importantly, is a bear. Just look at her. She wanted to freeze the waterfall the bad guy Riverin tried to poison, but Enril convinces her to undo this in order to gain entry into the Melodias city. You have a couple of fetch quests to do so the blacksmith can repair a magic bell, and from this point you're free to change between the seasons at Sante shrines dotted around the map. Just walk up to a statue, press a button and bam, climate change. As well as making certain areas accessible now, changing between seasons plays into the puzzle mechanics alongside your wind abilities. In winter, the cold weather lets you make snowball projectiles in a pinch for breaking ice walls, hitting enemies, or use them for putting weight on switches. When you change to summer, you can swim through previously frozen water or drain it out to get around easier. You swap between the two for solving puzzles, and again, most of the time it's fairly straightforward what you need to do, but a lot of the uses are really quite clever too. Towards the end of both games you get the Jumbrella cape that lets you guide Toku around the screen using a slipstream, which actually feels really good rather than gusting Toku around, especially at that stage when you've probably already made your way through most of the areas, so any last bit of backtracking to get all the collectibles is a bit easier. So anyway, now able to control the seasons, the pair are able to get into the now deserted Melodia city, whose residents are looking a little more stony than usual, and return to find out that Toku's mother has turned into stone as well. The chief explains that an old legend about the king of the Melodias returning to the city might be able to stop Riverin and cure Toku's mum, but that they've been lost for centuries. There seems to be a lot of that going around. I don't know why I didn't mention that earlier too, that could have come in handy. You find the king nearby, and I can't tell if he's either magic or a ghost or whatever, but you lead him back to the city in what I thought was actually a pretty good escort mission that leads into a pretty solid final boss fight with Riverin. You defeat him, pull off the evil mask, and then he turns back into normal Skull Kid style. The curse is lifted from everyone in the city, Toku's reunited with his mum, and the credits roll. I'm just gonna say it, Enril is really the only one pulling their weight in this partnership, and that's probably my biggest problem with the LostWinds games. The movement could be better just by giving Toku a jump. You could then use wind alongside it to get more distance or height. It'd also make it feel like you were dragging Toku around the map. Combat wise, as soon as an enemy appears on screen, the only thing you focus on is where your cursor is in relation to the thing you need to flick at, because that's the only thing you need to focus on. While enemies are more varied and a bit more difficult in Winter the Melodias, you can still keep Toku out of harm's way relatively easily. I think giving Toku a weapon would make the world of difference. Make it so that you need to use wind to knock an enemy off balance, or expose a weak spot that Toku has to hit with a sword or something. It would just make the character you're playing as feel a bit more involved and put them closer to the action so that they might be in danger from time to time, and who knows, maybe take some damage. The aesthetic of the game is super charming though. The visual style holds up well with quirky characters and nice backgrounds that you can interact with using your wind cursor. Something that was actually the inspiration for the game when lead designer Stephen Burgess watched how wind manipulated objects outside on a windy day and wanted to put this in a game. The first game's environments get a bit samey after a while, something that the sequel improves on quite a bit with summer and winter environments for a lot of areas. It's also nice to have at least some meaningful interactions with more characters in Winter the Melodias, rather than an assortment of background characters who don't really do much in the first game. There's a few colourful characters to see around Summerfalls, but it was all linked to progressing the main story. Adding a few around the world with maybe side quests or something would have been neat. The soundtrack for the games is really nice and atmospheric, but like the games themselves, they're pretty short, so they're on repeat pretty much start to finish, but they do make for some good background music, so I'm yet to get sick of them, which is always a good sign. It's also available on some music streaming platforms, so if you really want to relive the game while doing the dishes or something, knock yourself out. There are a few differences between the WiiWare originals and the PC ports of the LostWinds games, the most glaring of which is the visuals. Can you guess which is which? The Wii versions hold up fairly well, thanks mostly to the aesthetic if you ask me, and being upscaled for PC, it still looks pretty good, and originally being a WiiWare game, pretty much anything capable of video output will be able to run it just fine. The amount of things on screen that you can click to use instead of a key binding, as well as video tutorials for touchscreen controls found in the game's files, suggests that this is a straight port of the mobile version, and not a great one at that. The games play alright, but it lacks any sort of basic settings found on just about every PC game. I had to edit a config file in the game's directory just to change the resolution. The fairly simple control scheme on the Wii translates well over to the PC. It basically swaps IR pointing for mouse movements and the nunchuck's analog stick with keyboard inputs. Although when you gust Toku about on the Wii version, everything kinda slows down, which I'm assuming was included to help you chain together gusts more easily. This doesn't seem to be the case in the PC version, but Toku does feel a bit more floaty in the air, which gives you plenty of time to move over him again with the cursor. This seems to accomplish the same thing without feeling quite as jarring as slowing everything down on the screen, and it's much smoother feeling. There's a few other minor differences too. Save statues on the PC version activate automatically when you walk past them, whereas you have to do this manually on the Wii. There's also some extra content on the Wii version of Winter the Melodias that I couldn't find on PC in the form of models and bios for different characters and enemies. And probably the most bizarre change is that the PC version had my save file under my name. Not even my Steam username, my actual full name that it must have pulled from my profile for some reason instead of just numbering it like any other rational person might assume, so that's weird.
I get the feeling LostWinds games were a lot more impressive back in 2009 as WiiWare titles, rather than what now feels like the PC port of a mobile port of a Wii game. Especially when there's so many great indie titles you could probably get for about the same price.
But back when these games originally launched, at a time that you thought that this was a massive Smash Bros roster, getting LostWinds for a fraction of the price of a brand new game was a pretty good deal for the time, even if it was on the short side. They were fun and had a lot of charm to them. While Winter the Melodias is the better game, they're both so short that buying one or the other probably isn't worth it. You can get through the games in under 3 hours each, so if you like the look of it and think it's up your street, you can buy the Blossom Pack, which is both LostWinds games together, at a bit of a discount, doubly so if it's on sale, so a combined 4 to 6 hours would be easier to recommend if it's going cheap. The LostWinds games aren't perfect by any means, but I'd still recommend them as their own experience and as a piece of Nintendo history from a library of games that has, unfortunately, gone the way of the dinosaur.
Okay, now stop me if you've heard this one before, but I think they should make a sequel for the Switch.
It might not be very likely, but with a few tweaks, I think there's still the potential to make a really cool experience. Give Toku some basic platforming and combat abilities of his own that you use in conjunction with Enrol's wind powers. Have a bigger map with a few more powers to unlock and explore some of the lore that the first two games already set up but left untouched for the most part. Throw in some gyro controls and stick it on the eShop and hell, I'd buy that. You know what, that is a pretty good idea. I'm gonna go ahead and add it to the list of games people want to see on the Switch.